associating themselves with competent business people. And I have been in front of a lot of investors. We had some really large-scale investors early on in the Regulation D, and they do want to see that. They want to see competent, compliant accounting, systems and controls implemented in your business. And without that, I think number one, you're not going to be that successful. Number two, you're not going to get investors.
I think I fully agree with that. If you want to make yourself more attractive to investors, basically reverse engineer the due diligence process and see how they're going to be looking at you and make sure that all of the metrics are going to be favorable before you put yourself on the market.
I got one more point. Sorry. You know, when you get into the hemp world, it's about acres, it's not about square feet, like we talked about in cannabis. And so when you're going to scale to meet the kind of demand that Dean's company is going to have, you're talking about hundreds of acres, maybe several hundred acres, and then you're getting into really kind of commercial agriculture. That's not our experience as a cannabis grower at that scale. So it's very important for us. We actually partner with local strawberry farms. So in Santa Cruz County, there's 5,000 acres of strawberry farms. We only deal with organic strawberry farmers, and organic strawberries can only be planted maybe every 5 years. So they need rotation crops, and it's been a great experience for us to give our genetics to that farmer and let them grow a consistent and very clean and good product.
And it is a consistent and clean product. By the way, shit show, that was a legal term.
It is. You can find it in all the books.
Yes. So actually, let me just sort of pin this down. So structurally, because again, it is, you know, a lot of uncertainty here federally, and then there are departures at the state level on CBD. Is there a preferred sort of formation structure? Because we're talking about we're talking about the ops. Is there anything to be lent there as far as kind of a smarter way to form your company when you go out, specifically you two guys?
I mean, I think definitely having some sort of like corporate entity, so that if there's going to be an audit, it's going to fall on that entity, and you know, you always get the protections of the corporate form, protection from civil liability. And so I would say definitely always operate with a legal entity as opposed to being a sole proprietor or just a general partnership. Sometimes if people work together and they don't have any you know, any agreement to the contrary, they never formed a corporation, they never formed an LLC, the law in California will infer that there's a de facto partnership. And you know, now there's going to be all sorts of like obligations from one partnership to another. So I think it's always good to like give thought to which corporate form you're going to have and follow the formalities of that corporate structure so you get all the benefits of having a corporation. It doesn't do you any good to incorporate with the Secretary of State and not develop any bylaws and never hold any meetings, because that corporation will be pierced. There's a doctrine known as piercing the corporate veil, which would basically go from the immunity from civil liability to civil liability for the individual owners if they don't follow the corporate form. Yep.
So there's no one size fits all, but I will say that our firm tends to prefer California corporations, largely for the reasons that Omar has gone through. It gives a level of protection for the individuals. It creates a certain amount of formality that people are familiar with, right? So that when you look at most of the investors, they know corporations down pat, but they're a little less sure what a partnership actually is or what it means. Corporations allow you to bulk up on shareholders too. It's easier to manage a business that has multiple shareholders of your corporation than, say, a limited liability company. So, you know, one of my last companies had 12,000 shareholders. The other one had 50,000 shareholders. They were publicly traded, but it does scale. And we like California because we have this belief, rightly or wrongly, that it will help us if there is ever litigation, because we almost certainly will end up in a California court rather than, say, a Delaware court. And I know that there's a tendency towards Delaware law because those courts are very predictable, smart judges, and there's lots of jurisprudence that you can call upon so you know what to expect. But we don't want to be in Delaware.
And that's because cannabis is still illegal in Delaware. I guess for like a hemp-derived CBD products company, I think Delaware may be a viable option, in terms of going public in the future, because it's just something that the market understands. How do I analyze that?
That's a good point.
Well, so we actually looked at that, and I think Scott may want to chime in as well, but we looked at that, and I think the fact that, yes, there is no cannabis law on the books in Delaware, that's one, but at the end of the day, there's also, I don't believe, a hemp law on the books. So right now, you'd be hoping that, federal law sort of makes its way down, and so I think when you look at all this, even on the hemp side, our attorneys have advised to stay in a state that expressly has legal hemp rights.
Yeah.
Scott?
I just wanted to add an additional complexity in terms of organization. We're in both cannabis and we're in hemp. And, because of federal banking laws, a lot of different compliance issues, way more compliance in cannabis, we found that we had to keep those companies completely separate. And even then, if you're in hemp, that could affect your lending on other properties. We're kind of going through that right now. So it'd be interesting to get you guys' take on that.
Well, that's a really good point. I was thinking you could have a intellectual property holding company because, if you're going to have one brand with one pillar of that brand is going to be this hemp company and the other pillar of the brand is going to be a cannabis company, but they're going to have the same, branding and they're going to have that synergistic influence, then you probably want to structure it so that they're that they're basically licensing the brand from an independent IP holding company.
Yes.
And I think that goes back to your initial question of how would you end up structuring it. We do see that the intellectual property tends to reside within the IP holding company, and then there's a whole bunch of other holding companies potentially for the property ownership and equipment leases.
Right, and then license out to the more regulated, the other regulated entities and operate basically in silos, with going up to the holdings company at the IP level, right?
Yeah, so we use organizational groups for all kinds of things, and they can be very strategic. And they're particularly interesting in the regulated cannabis space because we're all aware of the restrictions that so many places have on alienation of the licenses, right? Alienation of the licenses and the permits, and some of the localities are way worse than the state level. Try to change something at Bellflower, for example, right? So, you can use organizational groupings for really, really good purpose. I'll add one other thing that's not so much corporate formation, but it's just it jumped into my mind when talking about the forum of dispute resolution. I am a big fan of arbitration. Arbitration in every single commercial agreement, arbitration in every single share purchase agreement, arbitration in employment agreements. Those are a little tricky, but they can be done. They're still enforceable here in California. There are lots of good reasons for it. The two that probably matter most to this group, the first is you can, almost by contract, shape the kinds of disputes and the kinds of remedies available to the parties, so you have tremendous power to get exactly what you want in a given relationship. And the other is it's completely private and it's in front of someone pretty much of your own choosing. So if you're worried about being in front of a 75-year-old who is, dead set against what you do and think you are evil coming into the courtroom, and you can't really strike them for that. You really can't. You could try, but you're not going to be successful. But you can choose your arbiter. And as the industry gets older and we have a working experience, we'll get to know who the arbitrators are who give all of you a fair shot.
The other reason why arbitration is so appealing and why so many cannabis or hemp-derived CBD agreements have arbitration clauses is because the justice system is broken when it comes to resolution of civil disputes. It takes approximately 7 years to get from filing of a complaint to a judgment in California just because the criminal cases take precedence. they have all sorts of deadlines and time limits, and if you don't get prosecuted within the speedy trial rights, then the prosecution has to be dismissed. And therefore, in custody criminal cases basically go to the front of the judicial processing order, and it takes like years to get justice in the California courts. So that's a big reason why arbitration is becoming increasingly more common in the cannabis world. And now we have like private dispute resolution companies like JAMS. They have cannabis aware neutrals, whereas for a long time, like even finding neutrals that were aware of cannabis was very difficult.
Interesting. So enough about laws. let's take it maybe 30,000 feet. We've talked about brands, ops, formation. One of the interesting dynamics happening is that you're seeing different types of entrants into the space. You see folks that are essentially sort of wellness brands coming in, again, working off that ethos. And then you're also seeing cannabis brands who understand the space and obviously are looking for diversification because they've got resources that are really conducive to hemp. So you've seen these two factors come in and sort of clash. Just interestingly wanted to hear your guys' opinions on how that landscape is going to look of CBD companies sort of globally.
Yeah, just my perspective, starting out as a cannabis company and moving into hemp, there's a lot of cannabis companies that are diversifying into hemp flower. I mean, distribution is different, but selling CBD products, but hemp flower, hemp terpenes. We're seeing a lot of people in the cannabis world try to get into that space. Some we're considering ourselves.
I think, there's a lot of growth in the hemp industry because a lot of the people who are afraid of euphoria, that undesirable side effect of cannabis, are completely okay with like CBD and with the hemp effects. And so I think there's many, like whoever wanted cannabis is already like a consumer is my belief, but there's many people who are trying to transition from all these opioid pain medicines who will find tremendous relief in CBD, and that's a tremendous growth market. We also have the boomer population that is now looking for alternatives to opioid painkillers and alternatives to like the whole pharmaceutical cocktails that they're being prescribed, and they're looking for like one alternative herbal solution. So we do see. I think we haven't really. It's hard to predict now what it's going to look like, but we're going to see like a lot more innovation, especially as there's like different formulations. We're gonna see cannabis drinks. We haven't really seen the full development of cannabis drinks. Just like 10 years ago, it would be difficult to predict that the vape cartridges would be one of the biggest segments of the cannabis industry. I think now it's difficult to predict what the next big segment will be, but it's gonna involve technology, technological innovation.
They will, and then it's a super dynamic space. So now it's off, 35% in the last 3 months, right? So room for new innovative products. I agree that it'll be a confluence of folks coming from different sectors that bring, I think, different viewpoints and different stories that they can craft to, I think, different segments of the audience. So let's do this. I think we have time for maybe one question.
Maybe one question. Let's hear it again for Dean and Omar and Ken and Scott. Who's got one question? One. Oh, all the way up. They're always in the back. Never fails. Whenever I stand in the back, they're in the front. And when I stand in the front, they're in the back. It's the law of stoner exercise.
I had a way to make them work.
I remind you to download the Hoova app. Also, the After Party tonight at Pier 23.
Thank you. If you are not expecting outside, closer, can you hear me?
Yep.
If you're not expecting outside investors or don't need outside investors, do you still recommend having a California corporation over an LLC if you are in the hemp space as a farmer or in the cannabis space as a farmer?
Let the lawyers go.
So do you think that you can keep your membership down below, say, 35?
Yes.
So I think there are pros and cons either way. I need to know more. But that's a very lawyerly answer. It probably isn't the most important decision on your plate. If you're already an LLC, you probably should just continue to be one. Operating agreements are very flexible, and that gives you a lot of ability to have the corporate affairs, if you will, match your business interests perfectly. So you probably should just stay where you are, I think.
I think the big appeal of an LLC is streamlined corporate governance. But in California, we have a statutory entity called a closed corporation that also offers streamlined corporate governance in a corporate form. And so that's also an option to consider, would be like a closed corporation. And many wine companies in Sonoma County, my home county, are closed corporations, like all the wineries and the wine growers. And, just because they're very easy to manage. You don't really have to follow all of the formalities of the corporation.